Sometimes the frame tells the story before the subject ever does. For this week of 52 Weeks of Fire, the prompt was vintage frame. And instead of starting with the subject, I started with the question, what deserves to be framed? Old frames weren't subtle. They weren't background noise. They were deliberate, ornate, heavy with intention. They said, this matters. Pay attention. So that's where this piece began. Not with the animal, not with the focal point, but with the space around it. I burned the background first, dark, textured, uneven, letting the wood take the heat and decide how much it wanted to give back. This part always feels a little uncomfortable, committing to the darkness before the subject exists. But I have learned to trust it. The background sets the tone. It decides whether the piece will whisper or stare back at you. Once the surface was grounded, the frame started to emerge. Vintage frames are rarely perfect. They're cracked, they're chipped, they carry time in their curves. So I leaned into that. Imperfect symmetry, softened edges, small details that don't scream for attention but reward you when you notice them. At this stage, I'm not thinking about speed. I'm thinking about restraint. Pyrography doesn't reward rushing. It rewards patience, pressure control, and knowing when to stop. When the frame felt settled, that's when the subject arrived. Not as decoration, not as an add-on, but as something held. I wanted the contrast to do most of the work, letting lighter burns lift the subject forward without outlining it into submission, letting the frame support it instead of compete. This is where I slow down even more. Tiny adjustments, subtle shading, listening to the wood instead of forcing it. There's a moment in every piece where it stops being about technique and starts being about trust. This was that moment. Vintage frames don't exist to show off the artist. They exist to honor what's inside of them. And that idea sits at the heart of 52 Weeks of Fire. This challenge isn't about producing perfect pieces or chasing trends. It's about showing up, practicing restraint, learning how to finish what you start, one focus burn at a time. Every week, ask a simple question. What happens if you commit? This week, committing meant letting the frame carry as much weight as the subject, letting darkness exist, letting quiet details do their job. And if you're following along with this challenge, I'd love to know, what would you frame? What moment, symbol, or story feels worthy of that kind of attention? Thanks for being here, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for another burn.